Hey guys, today we're going to continue what we started yesterday by going over Congress and its organization. As a quick review, we looked at a bell ringer that asked you what you knew about Congress off the top of your head and your opinions on COVID relief bill. So you would answer that in Google Classroom. We broke down the different houses and some of their fundamental differences. We looked at the qualifications of the members of Congress, and we also looked at what Congress looked like demographically and what they resemble in the last recent years. We also looked at voting districts to select the candidates, and then a term that happens way too often, gerrymandering. Today we're going to look at terms, sessions, and how Congress is organized. Let's start by looking at sessions. Session just means, well, the word just means the periodic sitting of a court. Now, Congress isn't a court, but you can think of them as just the lawmaking body. They periodically sit, and we call this a session. That period that we're talking about isn't like day to day, but that does happen. But when we think of a session, we think of just the entire year from January to January. Now, sometimes that does change. For instance, maybe they adjourn in December and then they start back in January. But it's basically a year of their service. Now, they are required to meet at least once a year, but often it's much more than that, right? They meet on average for 138 days per year to actually do work. It's even less than teachers. This all just depends though, and they can work more or they can work less, and they can work a lot more, let's say if it's in a pandemic and they have to meet constantly to figure out what needs to happen. They do take breaks, and here are some examples of that. And the president can also call special sessions to bring them all back in if they need. In the past, this has happened a couple times with government shutdowns when parties can't agree on a budget. And in addition to that, sometimes each house can actually have what they call a joint session where they can come together to meet. This could be for a bunch of different reasons, but most of the time when both houses meet, it usually has to do with an inauguration of a new president, to count electoral votes, or even just the regular once a year State of the Union address that the president delivers to say, hey, here's how everything's going. In addition to that, it could be for large policy reform meetings, let's say if it has to do with health care or national security or even like going to war, then that is when they would have a joint session, everybody would come together. But most of the time, each house just meets on their own. Let's break down the organization of each house by starting with the House of Representatives. First, the representatives pick a presiding officer. That's the person in charge. They do this mostly in private meetings called caucuses. Now I say mostly because this is a private political party meeting that both Republicans and Democrats will meet on their own separately to pick their leaders. Now I did say that the caucuses are partially in charge of this because they already have their leaders in mind. Now, the members actually pick based on a roll call, and the majority party is the one that wins because they have the most votes. So later, after they have the roll call in the houses, that is what actually determines the leader. Not necessarily the caucus, but you can kind of say unofficially there, since officially it's done in the actual house, but most people vote in line with what their party wants and what their party decided, fortunately or not. The political party that has the most members in each house is called the majority party. That should be an easy one for you. And they would also select the majority leader. The party with the fewer members in each house would be called the minority party, and then they would select their minority leader. Each party also has floor leaders and then a term called a whip. Now this is an interesting name of a role. But it's just basically a leader of the floor's assistant. What the whip does is go around and try to get votes to get support for legislation. So you can think of whipping up support. As I mentioned before, representatives pick their leaders, and the leader of the House would be called the Speaker of the House. The Speaker is always a member of the majority party and has the most powerful position in the House. No one in the House can speak or do anything until called on by the Speaker. The Speaker also influences the order of business. So if Congress is trying to get to hundreds of different things, well, the Speaker decides what actually gets priority or what even gets done, what even hits the floor. So it is a substantial position. Now, when we look at the Senate, technically the Vice President is the leader of the Senate, but the Vice President isn't often involved. Because of that, the Senate picks a leader temporarily in place of the vice president because the vice president's doing vice president things. This is called the president pro tempore. So like literally saying the temporary president. So the structure of the Senate is pretty much the same as the House when we think of caucuses or the leadership or whips or even the committees. Now let's talk about committees. Committees are where most of the actual work in Congress gets done. Both the House and the Senate rely heavily on them. They draft legislation, they review nominees, they conduct investigations, and they mostly iron out problems that we have. In general, the committees are small groups of representatives that have chairpersons in charge. Usually the chairperson is the highest ranking member there based on length in Congress, but not always. And also with a lot of these committees, they try to have people of both parties involved. There are different committees such as standing committees, special committees, select committees, joint committees, and so on. There's even subcommittees and committees on subcommittees. So there's a lot. And I'll give you a quick example. If we have 11,000 bills or something introduced, well, you're not going to have everybody meeting all the time to go over it. You'll get a group and you'll divide up the work. Take a look at a list of some of the committees that we have for the House and the Senate. And again, keep in mind that there's also subcommittees on these. Now, because we have all these little groups doing the work, we can get more work done. Now, if you want to see what Congress actually does, or maybe what your representative does, or maybe what a representative that you were told to really love or told to hate actually does, well, you can check out GovTrack. Okay, this is a great website, a great resource, especially if you're into politics even a little bit, or especially if you want to kind of fact check somebody for, again, a claim of love, a claim of hate, or any claim. You can go check out for yourself to actually see what they do or don't do, or what they have supported, or historically what they have supported. You can get the actual records, and this is absolutely amazing. Please, if you're into this at all, the least bit, check it. It's great. Now, when we get all these bills, whether it's a 24-page bill, or if it's like a 2,000-page bill, or 400-page bill, 200-page bill, 600, whatever it is, we have to think, who actually writes these? Well, sometimes it's the members of Congress, but not all that often. If it's a shorter one, perhaps, but most of these are group efforts. Many times it's attorneys. Of course, members do contribute, and often they do write smaller pieces of legislation, but many times when we're talking of the scope of 400 pages or more, they often go to other professionals for help. For example, if a congressperson likes a petition that we made in our class, they like our ideas, or if our member of Congress has their own idea that's just like ours, well, they can create a draft, or they can, map out their ideas. But a lot of times they actually have to take their ideas or their draft to the Office of Legislative Counsel. And this is a nonpartisan, meaning it's supposed to not be biased or favor one side. Hopefully it doesn't. But what they do is use all these attorneys to help turn that concept or my petition or whatever it is into proper legislative language. So they make it more formal in a government law type of way. So in sum, all these bills that we get, they're actually large group efforts most of the time. Now, to add to that, who writes bills? We can find plenty of controversies with this. When we're talking about bills and lobbyists, there's plenty of interest groups or lobbyists paying millions of dollars towards candidates' campaigns or PACs or super PACs so that they can try to get legislation that helps favor whatever their interest is. Maybe it's a good reason, maybe it's not, but a lot of that is subjective. In fact, sometimes these lobbyists even get their own bills almost word for word, or sometimes it is word for word, passed. So should think tanks or corporations or other organizations be able to make their own laws that our Congress just passes? Is it illegal? Do they find loopholes? Is it at least unethical and questionable? And in addition to that, many times with these bills, they're often so large and so huge that often members of Congress might not even read or be able to read or have enough time to read. Often they might just go with what the party says. Yes, you should vote for this. No, you shouldn't vote for this. Or the whip says, the whip will say vote for this, or don't. The polls, for instance, they're more libertarian and right-leaning. I definitely disagree with them on plenty of issues and agree with him on some, but one thing I really love about them is that they are known for actually reading the bills. So sometimes when they're 2,000 page bills, they actually read them. And they're also notorious for criticizing other members of Congress for not reading the bills, but just signing them. Anyway, we can leave it at that and go to the review questions. Remember to answer these in comments on Google Classroom. Number 1, list the qualifications of each house. Number 2, describe the terms of each house. And number 3, explain how each house is organized. Just give me the hierarchy. Remember to answer those in Google Classroom, and then after you need to complete your end of the lesson questions on Google Forms. The link is posted on the classroom, right? You're welcome to also pop in for my live chat if you have any questions, if you want to talk politics or laws or interest groups, or if you just want to say hey, you're welcome to pop in. All right, tomorrow we're going to move on to our next 2 readings, and then we will wrap that up by the end of the week. All right, have a good one, guys. Thanks for watching. Bye.